So, hello, whoever's watching. This is yet another motovlog channel, some would say. Although I am a little bit different, I hope. So I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to try and post as much as possible, as much as I can, and to be honest, the only time I have is when I am commuting to and from London. I'm known as the Lab Gorilla. I have been online for several years. I've been on YouTube for several years. In fact, I have a Milan podcast with some friends of mine called Milanistas 360, but we're putting that on hold at the moment because we're quite old school Milan fans, and the way the club is being run at the moment just doesn't give us a lot of identity left. That's especially true for me, so I'm going to focus on this stuff instead. I am riding a Suzuki V-Strom 650. It's a all-rounder bike. I've actually not had a full license for a huge amount of time, maybe about, if I think about it, about 3 years or so. But I have already put around 30,000 miles on this bike, and I did have a 125cc motorcycle, a Honda CBF 125 and a Honda CB 125F. I had both of those models for several years, so I rode on a CBT for about 6 years. However, when I moved out about 50 miles out of central London, I needed a bike that could get me through motorway, so that's in the UK 70 miles an hour speed limits, so I needed an engine that was able to cope with those kind of speeds without any much effort. And as I was taking my lessons to pass my Module 1 and Module 2, which is the way we pass tests in the UK, my instructor said, I know exactly what you need, and you'd be surprised. So I picked up this V-Strom for about $3 grand. It had 32,000 miles on it. It's now well past that, as I mentioned earlier. And yeah, it's been an incredible workhorse. As people said to me before, it's got a V-twin engine, hence the name V-Strom. And it has, you know, enough grunt to get you out of trouble, because sometimes you actually need speed to help you get away from trouble. Some people sometimes think that the only way to get trouble is to put the brakes on and stop, and sometimes actually, you know, if your vehicle is behaving in a very erratic manner, you want to actually create space between yourself and them. Or if you're getting off the line, you don't want to be dealing with other people. This bike is, you know, powerful enough to do that. It won't win any races. It's kind of more of an all-rounder. So yeah, it's been a good bike. I'll do a walk around maybe in a future video to kind of show you some of the things I've done to it. But today we are heading towards West London and an area called West Drayton. That is where I grew up and I went to secondary school in. We've only got 2 bars of fuel. We've already done 174.5 miles in this tank, so I have a trip meter that I start every time I fill up the tank. Say hello to this guy. Didn't say hello to me, I think. Okay. And we're going to be heading out onto the A1M towards London and then switching to the M25 to go around Heathrow towards West Drayton, because that is where West Drayton is. Right. old am I? I guess I would be categorized in the 45 to 55 age, if you get one of those questionnaires. I'm a father, I'm married, and I'm also, and unapologetically, am qualified to the PhD level. And I say unapologetically because I used to have a YouTube channel, which I had to delete because, unfortunately, I realized that a lot of people have a lot of hate in them, and they use the anonymity of YouTube to attack other individuals. And on that channel, perhaps some would say I've overshared. I recently went through a significant loss in my family, and so I spoke about grief. And some individual decided to say, I guess people with PhDs don't know everything, do they? You don't know how to cope with this. You're pathetic and stuff. And I was just conversing with another YouTuber, motovlogging YouTuber today, and they said they experienced the same thing. It's just people out there hide behind the anonymity of a name and a number on YouTube or Facebook or any other social media channel, and they just want to create hatred and havoc. I don't particularly understand the movement towards hating people who are educated. Maybe it's envy. Most likely it is envy. But on this channel, I will talk about my educational journey. I will talk about my life. I will talk about my experiences, because I think I have quite a lot to share that is not the same as what everyone else has done. So maybe we'll begin right there. Who am I? Well, I'm Italian and a scientist. I actually spent several years in Italy as a child. I'm not one of these, I'm Italian, but I actually was born in England. No, I was actually born in Italy, grew up early part of my childhood in Italy, and came to the UK around 1990. I remember the World Cup being on, and had to learn English because I didn't have a single word until I came to this country, and I was put directly into secondary school, an English secondary school, not an international one, so no one spoke Italian with me. But the beauty of being a child is that you have I think, inherent way and built-in way of learning rapidly. And I find this is the case with most children. I picked up English in about 3 months through just going to school and television and having no access to Italian at all, so I didn't hang on to the language. I still speak Italian, perhaps not as well as I wish I could still, but well enough to hold a conversation. But English is definitely my first language these days. But I don't speak like this. No, I don't do that. In fact, one of the funniest things that I discovered when joining YouTube and finding other English-speaking footballing channels is people that spoke English with an Italian accent from the United States that actually do not speak Italian. I have grown up assuming that the Italian accent comes from the fact that you speak Italian more often than you speak English. I found out that actually it isn't the case. Some people, if their entire environment speaks with that accent, that is what they're going to pick up. And when you think about it, it's actually completely natural. But it's such a weird thing. My head gets very confused because I hear, a Sicilian accent or a Southern Italian accent, and I go, and I start to speak to them, and they go, no, I don't actually speak the language. And you go, how can you have a stronger accent than me and you don't speak the language? I find that really fascinating, but interesting at the same time. So, right, I came to the UK in 1990, went to a secondary school in West London. It was Roman Catholic school, of course, because growing up in Italy, that is what you are. And yeah, had a few happy years there. I was always, I guess, interested in science. So in case anybody wants to know, I did A-levels in maths, chemistry and biology. Chemistry was actually my best subject. Biology to me was kind of more regurgitation, and maths, of course, problem solving. But I'm not the type of individual that went through school with flying colors. No, I did not. Again, I find, and this is my assumption, is that Italians, or me at least, I'm like this very much. So I would go through waves, and so I was very hormonal at that time, and at around the age of 17 I was taking A-level exams, and at the same time I was taking driving tests. And when I failed driving tests, it had an impact on my studies because I couldn't mentally, I wasn't mature enough to separate the two things. So I screwed up my A-levels the first time round. It's a quite interesting story right there. I've got a story of a bit of redemption, to be honest with you. I had an N in chemistry. I don't know what N stands for. Maybe it might be no grade or whatever. I have no idea. But after getting that N, I went back home crying, and I told my mother that I was going to, and I didn't know what to do. And she said, well, it doesn't matter. This is your own doing. If you're no good academically, then just go get a job somewhere else. Try and find a local job. Maybe try and find a job in a supermarket or something like that, so that you can, so you got money coming in. And Mum was very pragmatic that way, and so she just laid it out like that. She had her own, during her life, she had a very manual jobs. She never did any kind of like desk jobs. So hearing her say in such blunt words basically made me think I need to do something else. I need to sort myself out. And so I decided to go back and retake my A-levels, take the absolute humiliation and shame of, I felt at the time, humiliation and shame of having to sit with the year below us and go through the lessons again. And I've got to say, a few things changed, including the teachers in several of the subjects. And I'll remember Mrs. Hall for a long time. This is a chemistry teacher. Or was it? The title was either Mrs. or Doctor. I'm terrible with this. Oh, it's Mrs. Kingston and Dr. Hall. Sorry, that's how it was. It was two chemistry teachers that came in when I did my retakes, and the way they taught chemistry was completely different to my previous teacher. I got my head down. They had told me that the college was not very keen on me doing retakes because no one had ever improved their chemistry grades more than one grade, and a grade up from an N at the time was an E, and so it was felt that why should you come back and do it? Well, actually I got a B, and I only missed out on an A by a few points. And I remember the teacher saying to me, we don't know what happened to you in the first year, but you could achieve any grade you wanted. And the confidence that gave you to hear a teacher saying that with conviction, with belief, travel from them to me, and of course their teaching was great, and it kind of shows you the importance of having good teachers in life. So I hope they're doing well. I hope they progress very well in their own lives. But yeah, so I fixed all of my A-level grades, improved on all of them, and then went to university. And I remember I just missed out on quite a high level university. In case people don't know, it's called Imperial College, and my second choice was a university called Queen Mary in Westfield on the east end of London, and remembering I lived on the west end of London. And I, fun enough, even though I went through a system called clearing, where they kind of see whether there's spaces for you to fit in, I decided not to even try that, because my second choice was Queen Mary's. And one recommendation I'd have for any kids that are looking to go to university: definitely do take the time to visit, meet with current students, get a feel of the place. That's the best thing I can say, because there is sometimes you have a very strong gut feeling, and my gut feeling at Imperial was that it wasn't for me. I remember one of the things that struck me when I visited Imperial was that one of the students that was showing me around spent his time laughing at other universities and other students in terms of how kind of lower level they were than him, and that gave me a really terrible impression of that place, because I didn't see myself as anything special, that I deserved to be in a better place than others. I'm just me, and I've always been this way. So yeah, it really put me off, because it made me think this is quite an elitist place. I don't like it. I don't like people talking that way. And actually going to Queen Mary's in Westfield was one of the best decisions I made. It was a wonderful university, and lots of different ethnic groups. I got to know the East End of London. I took on a part-time job at weekends to make ends meet as well. So I used to work in a bookmaker's. Pretty exciting time in my life, actually. And at the same time, I met my long-term girlfriend, now my wife and mother of my children. Perhaps the greatest human being I've ever met, to be honest. And no, it was a great time in my life, my late teens to early 20s. So my first degree was a bachelor's in genetics and microbiology. It was around the time when Jurassic Park was really hot, and a lot of people, not me, but a lot of people took the course simply because they wanted to learn how to clone genes and so on, which I thought was really short-sighted. What happens when the film goes out of fashion? And a lot of the people I know that took the degree with me actually did not go on to scientific careers. They went back and they switched again when the next fad became IT, for example, and they ended up doing masters in that. But for me, I got a 2-1 in genetics and microbiology. It's a very interesting degree. Highly recommend it. I have no idea if it's still running today at that institute. And then I said, okay, I think I would like to learn to become an independent scientist. And I started to kind of think about what it takes to become an independent scientist, and I realized that in that field it needed a PhD. So I started applying for PhDs immediately, and I was not even getting responses, no interviews whatsoever. Even though sometimes I was applying for PhD positions with former lecturers of mine at Queen Mary, so they knew me personally. And one of them, pulled me aside and said, we can't give you, you can maybe come to interview, but you're not going to get it because you're up against candidates from Oxford and Cambridge. So they're very competitive positions, PhDs. A lot of the time to have a funded studentship, you need to be going up against anyone that wants to take that studentship, depending on the rules, whether it's UK based or international based. And you basically have to be better than them, and a lot of the judgment is based on their CV, and then obviously that first impression of, a 2-1 from Queen Mary's versus a first from Oxford. You can't compete to a lot of these reviewing panels. So I decided, okay, I need to do another step, and the next step was to do a master's. Now, I was very fortunate. I was the final year when education in the UK, higher education, was free. I was the final year when my tuition fees were zero. But not only that, because I was from a low-income family, the government gave me a bursary. which I was able to utilize to buy books and pay for travel and so on. So it was a time when people were able to explore, different subjects and study different things and improve themselves that way. And I genuinely feel sorry for a lot of kids these days, because they're kind of forced into much harder decisions. Yes, you can take a student loan, of course, but I think a lot of students are thinking, is it worthwhile having a student loan if I might need to be paying it back for the next 20, 30 years of my life? It's just having £200 taken out of your paycheck for the rest of your life. Is that the right way forward? So, I'm encountering this in my oldest child. This is something that it's a significant discussion to be had. So, I had to go to Mum, cap in hand, and say, Mum, look, I finished my A-levels, I finished my degree, Mum, I did all right. I would like a master's because I would like to continue my educational journey. And Mum, again, was just super supportive. She said, well, I've put money aside, here it is, it's for you. And she paid for my whole master's in cash. Now that's an incredible thing for her to have done. And just to make it completely clear, in late 90s, a master's was, master's was £5,000, and it was something like £3,000 for tuition fee for the year and £2,000 for the laboratory summer project, which you had to undertake. But it was the best £5,000 ever spent. It was, first of all, an incredible challenge for me mentally. It was a master's in a topical clinical microbiology. So obviously from my first degree I had genetics and microbiology, which meant that, the microbiology part was not the problem. The clinical part was the problem. I found out, I hadn't quite realized that the majority of students within my course at the Royal London Hospital were medics, so fully qualified medics, and they were taking this master's in order to take a year out of the specialization in microbiology. So they were basically doing this whilst working in order to specialize as being a microbiologist in the future. So that meant that a lot of the lectures were very medical. So things like, how can I describe them to you? I would get a lecturer who was a medical doctor come in front of the lecture hall, hold out chest x-rays for a patient and say, what do you think this is? What would be the medication you would give? What would be the dosage? Now, there were times when I had to say, well, I think it's, for example, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, but I don't know, and I know what antibiotics I'd give, but I wouldn't know about the dosage because that's not something I have to deal with. And thankfully that was good enough, kind of. But a lot of it was not necessarily, it's what you learn about medicine as well, it's not necessarily about, it's about spotting patterns and linking things together more than it is about hard science and understanding a problem and resolving an issue. It's more like, what are the symptoms? What could it potentially be? What does my experience tell me? What do the books tell me? I think it's likely to be this kind of thing. So medicine is quite different actually to research science, which again I didn't quite appreciate. But I had a lab partner with me, and he was a medic, and it was really interesting how we both kind of tackled problems and tackled tasks. Now, that master's was possibly one of the hardest things I have done in my life academically. It was all done over a year. The exams were, and at the end of the year, the exams were 4 hours on a Monday, 4 hours on a Tuesday, 4 hours on a Wednesday, all written. And then I would have a viva on the Thursday, and by Friday they'll tell you if you passed. And if you got a C or below in any single test, exam, intermediate exam throughout the year, then you'd fail the entire thing immediately. That's how kind of cutthroat it was. And I do remember very well that out of my class of 6 full-time students, we had plenty more part-time students, but out of 6 full-time students that took it all in a year, only 3 ended up taking it. 3 of the guys just decided not to even bother taking the exam because they were sure that they had failed. So it was daunting, and I've got to say, halfway through the year, I seriously considered that I couldn't take it. I just wasn't smart enough. And I remember having this heart-to-heart with my wife and saying, oh my God, I've just spent £5,000 of my mum's money, and I don't think I can do this. I don't think I'm capable. And my wife said, what is the worst that can happen if you put your mind to it and give it all you've got? The best that can happen is you pass and you move on with your career. The worst that can happen is you fail. But you're still going to be here, and we're all going to love you just the same. And you know, just hearing those words from someone who is not in the field, who doesn't fully appreciate the shoes that I'm in, really gave me a huge amount of confidence. They were the exact words I needed. And so yeah, I just kind of said, okay, let's just give it everything I've got and see. And as it turns out, I actually did all right. There was no reason to panic or be concerned. In the end, I was told I passed, and that's when I said, all right, let's apply for PhDs again. And once again, this time I was getting into interviews because I have a bachelor's degree, I have a master's degree. I was getting into interviews for PhDs, but I was not getting any offers. And once again, I said to myself, what is it that makes you stand out? And how can I make myself stand out even more? Now that I have a master's as well, how can I possibly do more than this? And that's when I realized what I needed to do was perhaps have direct laboratory experience. And fortunately, my supervisor for my summer project during my master's was just in the process of trying to hire someone because he had just lost his postdoctoral researcher. So that's someone who already has a PhD who's doing research for him. But the guy had a mental breakdown during that time, during that project, and so the position became available. And it was said to me, look, listen, you don't have a PhD, you don't have the experience, but my supervisor said, you know, I'm willing to teach you and to show you. It's going to be hard work, but are you willing to take it? And I didn't hesitate. I said yes, which meant I was getting a fully funded job as a research assistant. You know, I went from tiny money every single weekend to a decent paid job in mid 20,000s, I think it was at the time, mid 25,000 pounds or so. And I was working all hours of the day, and I got to execute on the techniques that I'd learned through textbooks in the previous years, and I'd practiced a little bit during my masters. And the project was super interesting. It was ancient DNA extraction, working on the teeth of plague victims from the 14th century. Very, very interesting. So I was doing that work, and you know, in another episodes perhaps I'll talk about it in full, like I had done in the previous channel that I had, but maybe this time I'll expand it a bit more on the latest research as well, because I can assess that. But it was again a very intense time, a stressful time, but it was a very good time. You know, my wife was working full time. By this time we'd moved into central London. We were renting and sometimes staying in workplaces. She used to work for a hotel, so they had staff quarters sometimes. So you know, it was an exciting time. that year really flew by, but we managed to do a lot of what I consider, in my opinion, very good work. We published a paper based on that work, and that really was the big key. The moment that I got a publication under my name and a year of laboratory experience, suddenly you're going up. It doesn't matter if someone has a first level degree from Oxford. If someone's got a bachelor's, a master's, a year of laboratory experience and a paper, that's an individual that's going to come in and be able to hit the ground running, someone who is not at risk. And because a lot of people, especially these days, are very good using AI and filling in CVs and making themselves look like the most perfect candidates possible. But when you actually give them tools in their hands to do laboratory work, they don't have a clue what they're doing, or they just don't have the attitude for it. And it's very hard to spot those individuals unless you do a manual test kind of thing. So yes, at that point then I started to get offers from several PhDs, and I took a position in a lab. Life, I find, needs a bit of luck. Sometimes you make your own luck, and there's a saying in golf, the harder I practice, the luckier I get. That is a saying that stands the test of time and is applicable to many different fields, in fact. Okay, we're turning right here. Our fuel light is flashing, so we're gonna have to go to the next petrol station. And we're entering the A414. But yes, so my supervisor had a colleague who was looking for someone to work on a project funded by DSTL. DSTL stands for Defense Science and Technology Laboratories. They're part of the Ministry of Defense. And in the early 2000s, this was a project focusing on a concern that the UK government had about a bacterium that could be potentially used as a biological warfare agent, and they had no vaccine against it. And so they said, can you do research to try and understand how we can potentially treat this bacterium? So that was, I developed expertise working alongside some of the best scientists in the world in this field. Helped to set up labs during my PhD. It was a wonderful experience. Again, I'll talk more, I'll expand on that. This is just an introduction to who I am and what my qualifications are. But that was wonderful 3 years, really challenging. Plenty of days are, I was in bits, in pieces, crying. And PhDs are like that. To you at that time, they are the most important thing in the world. It is your sole ambition in the world to get your PhD. You don't really think of anything much else. You're just so driven to getting it, and you'll work every hour of every day to do it. And to deliver. But we did something incredible. We developed new technologies. We discovered new things. As I said, we set up brand new labs, brand new models. It was fantastic. Exactly what a PhD should be, in my opinion, because it taught me about problems, how to tackle a hypothesis, how to resolve it using existing techniques, how to develop new techniques, how to improve on techniques, how to pick up techniques from others. It was really a challenging experience, but that PhD, and the final part of a PhD in the UK is called a viva. So you write a thesis. I can't remember. It can be up to 100,000 words. I think it can be. So it's like a book in essence. So you write a thesis, and then you have a viva. So that is you're put in a room with experts in the field, and you literally discuss your findings and your findings and your recommendations, and they basically first of all find out if you did the work by yourself. And then they question you whether you have, you know all the literature, whether you really are a world expert in what you did. So let's just get some fuel. Let's pause the video here. We'll continue later.